Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack the absolutely massive, highly interconnected world of global construction. You know, when we look at a towering skyscraper or a brand new highway, it is so easy to just see the concrete and the steel. But behind literally every major infrastructure project is a complex, global network of engineering and construction firms facing incredible risks and, honestly, massive opportunities. So today, we're going to use the industry-standard sustainability framework to see exactly how investors measure the true impact of these global builders.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with global scale and diverse segments, then move through navigating environmental project impacts, ensuring structural integrity, protecting the global workforce, climate risks and life cycle, and finally, business ethics and anti-corruption.
Section 1. Global scale and diverse segments. To really get this space, we first need to shatter a pretty common illusion. We've got to drop the idea that construction is just a local or regional business, because for the heavyweights of this industry, that couldn't be further from the truth. The engineering and construction services industry is a sprawling global ecosystem, and it generally breaks down into four major segments. First up, you have engineering services. They handle the incredibly complex architectural design and feasibility studies way before ground is even broken. Then there's infrastructure construction for massive civil projects, followed by non-residential building for things like commercial and industrial facilities, and finally you have the building subcontractors handling all that specialized work like electrical, plumbing, and interior design. What's truly fascinating here is how these massive global operations typically span multiple segments all at once to get the job done. A single cross-border project relies on a perfectly timed sequence across all these steps.
And this brilliantly illustrates the vast, diverse customer base these global firms are actually serving. On one side, they are working hand-in-hand with public sector developers, securing contracts for huge public works. We're talking dams, railways, and airports that literally keep societies functioning. But on the flip side, they are simultaneously serving private sector developers worldwide, constructing high-value assets like data centers, luxury hotels, and sprawling factories. It's kind of like playing SimCity, but with billions of real dollars on the line.
The sheer scale of these operations is just staggering. Like this quote points out, the biggest entities operate globally and span multiple segments. We're talking about colossal firms that might be designing a hospital in Europe, building a massive highway network in Asia, and managing specialized subcontractors for a tech data center in North America, all at the exact same time. Which, of course, begs the question, how do we even begin to measure, track, and hold these multi-continent behemoths accountable for their risks?
Well, that is exactly where this comes in. The SASB standards, which are now under the stewardship of the IFRS Foundation, act as the ultimate standardized tool. Investors, and yeah, that includes the pension funds managing your retirement, use these precise accounting metrics to cut through all that complexity. It allows them to hold global engineering and construction firms accountable for their environmental, social, and governance impacts.
Section 2. Navigating environmental project impacts. Let's look at the most immediate footprint a project leaves behind, the environmental impact right during development. Now, infrastructure projects can dramatically improve economic development, for sure, but they also severely disrupt local ecosystems. Firms have to perform major clearing, grading, and excavation. And we aren't just talking about a few cut-down trees here. We're talking about massive ecosystem disruption, potential hazardous chemical spills, and water contamination. So, SASB requires entities to track their management of all these risks, and they very closely track the number of incidents of non-compliance with environmental permits. Why? Because a single permit violation or unmanaged water discharge doesn't just harm the environment, it causes severe project delays, incredibly costly regulatory fines, and major community pushback.
Section 3. Ensuring structural integrity.
Of course, getting the project built without environmental fines is really only half the battle. A building's success is ultimately about the safety and structural integrity of the final product. In this industry, there's a very critical metric called rework. Basically, this measures activities that have to be done over again, or work that has to be entirely removed because of defects or safety issues. And just to be clear, we are excluding client-requested changes here. Imagine having to tear out and redo your newly remodeled kitchen, but, on a billion-dollar scale. That is rework. Defect and safety-related rework costs are a massive red flag for investors. Poor structural management means terrible profitability in the short term, and in the long term, it opens the door to massive legal liabilities and reputational damage that can literally lock a firm out of future bids.
Section 4. Protecting the global workforce.
Now, creating that structurally sound building relies entirely on human labor. This is an industry that requires substantial manual labor,
often exposing workers to heavy machinery, powered haulage, and some genuinely hazardous conditions. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this specific number, 200,000. Under the SASB standards, safety incidents are measured using the Total Recordable Incident Rate, or TIIR. That 200,000 actually represents the total number of hours that 100 full-time workers can provide in a single year, working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks. It creates a standardized baseline, allowing investors to fairly compare the safety records of a regional firm with 500 employees directly against a global giant with 50,000.
And the accountability doesn't just stop at the official payroll. The standards require firms to report their fatality and incident rates for both direct employees and contract employees. Global firms absolutely cannot outsource their safety liabilities. They are held accountable for the safety of the massive networks of independent contractors and temporary labor they supervise on site. Because a strong safety culture isn't just a moral imperative, it's a massive competitive advantage when you're bidding for those huge new projects.
Section 5. Climate Risks and Life Cycle.
So what happens once the keys are finally handed over? Well, this shifts our focus from the construction phase to the long-term life cycle and climate impacts of the completed infrastructure. Buildings and major infrastructure projects are among the largest users of natural resources globally. Because of that, clients and regulators are heavily pushing for sustainable built environments. SASB tracks how many commissioned and active projects are actively seeking third-party multi-attribute sustainability certifications. And these aren't just alphabet soup. Certifications like BREEAM, Green Globes, Envision, and LEED actually prove that a firm is actively incorporating operational phase energy efficiency, water conservation, and high indoor environmental quality right into their designs.
But the climate story goes even deeper into a firm's future revenue stream. Notice how this breaks down a firm's future revenue, or backlog, into distinct categories. Investors need to see the value of future revenue tied to hydrocarbon-related projects like oil, gas, and coal, which are facing immense regulatory and cancellation risks right now. They then balance this against the backlog for renewable energy projects like solar and wind, and non-energy mitigation projects like mass transit and carbon capture. This brilliantly shows whether a firm is tethered to a carbon-intensive past or if they're successfully pivoting toward a sustainable future.
Section 6. Business Ethics and Anti-Corruption.
Finally, we have to talk about how these massive global contracts are won in the first place. Crossing borders to build vital infrastructure brings intense scrutiny regarding business practices. Because these firms operate globally, they're dealing with complex local permitting and immense project financing in regions with wildly varying governance standards. So, SASB requires firms to explicitly report the number of active projects and the value of their backlog in countries holding the 20 lowest rankings in Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. Investors want to know exactly how much revenue is exposed to high-risk environments. Because operating in those 20 lowest-ranked countries isn't just a metric, it is a massive financial and reputational tightrope.
The standards also demand total transparency regarding monetary losses from legal proceedings tied to bribery, corruption, or anti-competitive practices. This includes shady things like complementary bidding, which is essentially submitting a sky-high bid you intentionally want to lose just to manipulate the market, or bid pooling, where competitors secretly split contracts amongst themselves. So the crucial point is this: ethical breaches don't just result in steep fines and short-term losses. A poor track record of bribery or rigged bids causes irreparable reputational damage, completely locking these firms out of future global projects.
And that brings us full circle. The engineering and construction industry shapes the very world we live in, handling massive public and private projects across literally every continent. But as we've seen through the SASB standards, building for the future means so much more than just pouring concrete. It demands rigorous environmental management, unwavering structural integrity, a real commitment to worker safety, strategic climate planning, and absolute ethical transparency. So, as the global population grows and the demand for infrastructure continues to surge, we have to ask which global firms are just building, and which ones are truly building sustainably. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.